There was once a place where all the knowledge of the world was kept. Scrolls from Babylon, maps from India, medicine from Egypt, stars charted by Persian eyes. A place where words were sacred and silence was feared. That place was the Library of Alexandria, a cathedral of knowledge where poets, scientists, and philosophers gathered to preserve the memory of mankind. But one night, the pages burned, the scrolls turned to ash, the words turned to smoke, and the greatest minds of history were silenced. Some say it was an accident, some say it was war, but others whisper the name of a man, a priest, a fanatic, a holy warrior who saw knowledge as blasphemy. He didn't come with armies, he came with fire, and in his hands, he held the match that would darken the world for centuries. This is the story of how one man's faith became the funeral pyre for human wisdom. The year was 391 AD. Alexandria was old, older than empires. Founded by Alexander the Great, ruled by pharaohs, shaped by Greeks. It was a place where East met West, where gods walked beside logic, where temples stood beside libraries. The streets were lined with marble, the harbor filled with ships from every known land, and above it all stood the library, not just a building, a living archive, a cathedral of scrolls, thousands of papyrus texts, copies of every book brought into the city, mathematics, medicine, magic, poems that sang of stars, records of forgotten kings. Scholars came from Rome, India, Africa, and beyond. They read in silence. They argued in whispers. They believed that knowledge could outlive empires. And for centuries it did. The old gods were fading. Isis, Anubis, though their statues still stood, but their temples were quiet. In their place, a new faith was rising. One God, one book, one truth. Christianity was no longer the religion of rebels. It had become the religion of emperors. In Rome, crosses replaced columns. In Alexandria, whispers turned to flames. Churches were built on temple ruins. Priests now spoke with the authority of kings. And among them was a man named Theophilus, a bishop, a priest, a man who believed that books written by pagans were traps, that philosophy was a disease, that every scroll not written by holy hands was a serpent in disguise. And in his mind, the library was not a treasure, it was a threat. The year was 391 AD. The skies over Alexandria were gray, and below them, the war had already begun. Not with swords, not with soldiers, but with chants, with torches, with holy rage. Bishop Theophilus had declared war, not on men, but on memory. He called the ancient temples wicked. He called the library a nest of demons. And the people followed, some out of faith, some out of fear. Monks, once silent, now roamed the streets with hammers. Statues were toppled. Scrolls were ripped apart. And then came the Temple of Serapis. It was one of the last homes of the old gods, a towering structure filled with wisdom and relics, a sacred place of science and learning. But in the eyes of the priest, it was a heresy carved in stone. Theophilus led his followers through its gates. They did not pray. They burned. Fire licked the walls. Shelves of scrolls became ash. Paintings turned black. The library, or what remained of it, was lost in smoke. No army had conquered it. No king had destroyed it. It was a priest who brought it down. As the scrolls burned, one voice dared to rise. A woman, a teacher, a philosopher. Her name was Hypatia. She wore no armor. She carried no sword, only knowledge, and the courage to speak it. Hypatia had studied the stars. She had rewritten old equations. She taught men how to think and question those who ruled. She believed truth lived in numbers, that no faith could silence reason. Her classroom was not a battlefield, but in 5th century Alexandria, ideas could get you killed. She warned of the rising zealotry. She begged the city's leaders to stop the madness. But the flames had already taken root. To the angry mobs, she wasn't a thinker. She was a witch, a heretic, a threat to their God. And in a world set on fire by belief, her voice would soon be silenced. It began with whispers. She's dangerous. She corrupts the youth. She speaks against the church. Then came the crowd. Not soldiers, not scholars, just men, filled with rage, wrapped in robes of faith. They waited in the streets. When Hypatia left her classroom, they followed. She did not run. She believed truth would protect her. But truth was silent. They dragged her from her chariot, stripped her, beat her, and on the cold stone floor of a Christian church, they killed her with broken tiles, not with swords, but with pieces of the city she had tried to save. They tore her body apart, burned the pieces outside the city gates. There was no trial, no tomb, no prayer, only silence, and from that silence came fear. The flames did not die with Hypatia. They spread, not through wood, but through minds. Across Alexandria, scrolls vanished, not just from the library, but from homes, temples, private collections. Science was called sorcery. History was called heresy. And those who remembered were told to forget. Priests searched for forbidden texts. Astronomers hid their charts. Doctors destroyed their notes. In dark alleys, pages burned. In quiet rooms, ideas were erased. Some tried to protect the knowledge. They copied what they could, hid scrolls beneath floorboards, whispered teachings in secret. But the tide was rising, and one by one, the voices of reason were drowned. The library was gone, and with it, thousands of years of wisdom, dreams, and truth. Smoke rose from Alexandria, and with it, the memory of mankind drifted into ash. After the fire came the dark, not the dark of night, but the dark of forgetting. Questions once answered vanished. How did the Egyptians build pyramids? How did Babylon chart the stars? What did ancient medicine know? That we would lose for centuries? Gone. Lost in flame. The Library of Alexandria had held records of nations, cures, languages, lost inventions. Some say it had maps to lands no longer known, theories of the earth, centuries before they were rediscovered. Now only silence remained. Europe descended into shadows. Scholars wrote in fear. Curiosity became a crime. They called it the Dark Ages. But the darkness was not natural. It was made by human hands, by fear, by fire, and by one man's belief that truth was dangerous. Not all stories have villains. Not all tragedies have flames. But this one did. Historians still argue what was truly lost. Was it 40,000 scrolls? Or 400,000? Was it ancient machines? Medical cures? Forgotten philosophies? We may never know, because when you burn a book, you don't just destroy words, you destroy voices. The voices of people who lived, who dreamed, who tried to leave something behind. Gone. Because one man believed, their knowledge threatened his faith, and so, an entire generation of wisdom was buried under dust and rubble, not lost to time, but to fear. We remember the names of kings, of generals, of saints, but the names of the librarians, the scientists, the women who taught logic and astronomy, their names are ash, scattered by wind, forgotten by flame. Centuries passed, the flames cooled, the ashes settled, and the world began to ask again, what are the stars made of? What lives beneath the skin? What lies beyond the ocean? But the answers came slowly, because we were starting over, brick by brick, word by word. Great minds like Galileo, Avicenna, and Newton, they stood on what little remained. Scraps, translations, faded pages smuggled across borders. The great flame had consumed the path, and those who followed had to find their way, in the dark. And yet, even in that darkness, light returned, not because of emperors, not because of priests, but because a few brave souls still believed that truth mattered, that memory could be rebuilt, even if the first library was already gone. His name is barely remembered. Theophilus, a bishop, a priest, a man of faith, who believed that fire could purify. He stood not with scholars, but with mobs, not with truth, but with control. And in his hands, he held more than a torch. He held the permission to destroy, permission granted by power, by fear, by the silence of those who could have stopped him. Some called him holy, others a fanatic, but history remembers him as the man who stood while the Library of Alexandria burned. He did not blink. He believed he was saving the world. But in truth, he was ending an era. One match, one fire, and the light of human memory vanished into smoke. When the fires went out, the city did not cheer. It did not mourn. It simply moved on. Ash covered the marble floors. The scrolls were gone. The shelves were empty, and no one rebuilt them. The silence was louder than any sermon. No more debates in the courtyards. No more teachers drawing stars in the sand. No more voices questioning what gods could not answer. The priests called it peace. The rulers called it order. but the silence was hollow. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a scream, a stillness not of calm, but of erasure. In Alexandria, people still walked the streets, markets still opened, ships still arrived, but something was missing, something no one could name. The city looked the same, but it had forgotten how to think. Time passed. The stones of Alexandria cracked. Statues fell. Temples turned to ruins. But beneath the dust, something remained. A whisper, a trace, a memory. Archaeologists would one day find fragments, burned scrolls, blackened ink, a piece of a map that once stretched beyond the known world. They would dig through layers of ash and silence, trying to read a language no one spoke anymore, trying to understand what had been lost. A single line from a philosopher, a broken diagram of a machine, a poem to the moon, written in a hand long forgotten. These were not treasures. They were ghosts, ghosts of what we once knew, ghosts of what we chose to forget. And in every dust-covered scrap, the same message whispered back. We were here, we knew, and you let it burn. Not all knowledge is written in books. Some of it lingers in architecture, in language, in dreams. Though the Library of Alexandria turned to ash, echoes of its brilliance still ripple through time. Ideas that survived, barely, stitched into the scrolls of other cities, passed in whispers, preserved in secret. A Greek formula hidden in Arabic text, a Babylonian star chart carried east by a traveler, bits and pieces, shards of memory. And from those shards came the Renaissance, a slow rekindling, a cautious remembering. But even then, we were only rebuilding part of what we had lost. The full picture, the full mind of ancient humanity, was gone. All that remained was an echo that asks us, will you protect knowledge next time? Or will you let it burn again? The fire that destroyed Alexandria was not the last, it was only the first. In centuries to come, books would burn again. In Rome, in China, in Nazi Germany, libraries set ablaze, knowledge censored, ideas outlawed, always the same pattern. A leader grows afraid. A priest demands purity. A crowd is told what must be destroyed. And then, the torches rise. The second flame lives in every age, not just in fire, but in silence, in the banning of books, the rewriting of history, the fear of asking, why? Every time we choose ignorance over truth, we strike another match. The Library of Alexandria is gone, but the question it leaves behind remains. Will we guard the light, or light the fire again? Somewhere, in the dust of a ruined city, a single page may still lie buried, a scroll untouched by flame, a line of poetry, a forgotten equation, one last ember of what once was. And maybe, that ember is enough to remind us that knowledge is not just power, it is memory, it is voice, it is soul. And once it's gone, no crown, no god, no empire can bring it back. The Library of Alexandria was not just a place, it was a promise that the human mind could preserve its own story, that we could remember ourselves. And now, that promise lives in us, in what we choose to protect, in what we refuse to burn. Because even in the dark, even when the scrolls are gone, one ember can light the world again.